Hey friends, I'd like to tell you my third of three stories specifically designed to help local churches begin to think about the kinds of changes that are necessary not only to survive in the 21st century, but ultimately to thrive. Now, I've talked Dinosaur to Wolfpack. If you've heard that story, you've probably heard me talk about things like the coming spiritual ice age. We've talked about the sinking ship metaphor and about some of the things that will be necessary to think about in terms of pragmatics for how we think about the way that our churches are organized and how we arrange them for maximum effect. But I'd like to tell you the third story, and that's really patterned after a television show from the early 2000s. I call it Battlestar Galactica. And the point of this metaphor is that often what we think of when we think of friends and enemies changes when you apply enough forms of external pressure. Now, if you haven't seen the series, you might want to know that the first version of Battlestar Galactica occurred in the 1970s. I was just a little guy. Man, I loved it. I had Battlestar Galactica toys. I loved the idea. And it's kind of funny, if you watch it nowadays, you sort of watch that and you kind of go like, I can't believe that this was any good. But it had this deep place in kids like me as we kind of grew up over time. And we loved it so much that in 2004, the Sci-Fi Channel picked it up and redid it. And that was amazing. It ran from 2004 to 2010. And so if you hear people talk about Battlestar Galactica, you probably need to clarify, do you mean the 1970s Battlestar Galactica, or do you mean the 2000s Battlestar Galactica? Because most people will be talking about the 2000s version. And in either environment, the plot goes something like this. If you track it across the seasons, the plot of Battlestar Galactica is basically this. Humans live on a planet called Caprica. They are happy. It's a borderline utopian society, and the reason why it's borderline utopian is because several years back, the humans created an artificially intelligent form of life that they called the Cylons. Now, at first, the Cylons were servants. They were, ways of like Alexa or, Siri or different things like that. But eventually, the Cylons become artificially intelligent enough to realize they don't really like the humans very much anymore. And seems to be true with a lot of these kinds of stories, the Cylons rebel. And in a single moment that resembles very much like a Pearl Harbor 9/11 kind of an event, the Cylons launch a full-scale attack against Caprica, simultaneously wiping out almost every human being on the planet, except for a very small band that have the presence of mind and enough forewarning to flee to the stars. It'd be like picturing if you had to just suddenly grab everything in your home, throw it into your car, and we had to go on a road trip to a place to try to find some safety. And here's the deal. As a result, the setting of the vast majority of Battlestar Galactica is in space. And here's the thing you need to know. There's only one battleship that protects the entire fleet. And it's kind of this old, aging. It had just been turned into a museum. It had just been mothballed, called the Battlestar Galactica. And the Galactica's primary job is to protect this ragtag little fleet of Capricans from the continual onslaught of Cylon attacks and to try to find some place where they can eventually call home. Now, in the mythology of Caprica, there's this sort of Greco-Roman nod. Like they have this sort of like idea of the gods like Apollo and Zeus and all these different things. And what the show is trying to tell you is that at one point in time, all of humanity lived on Earth. And then 11 of these tribes went and they ended up in Caprica and places like that. But there is this myth of this place called Earth. And they don't know where it is. And they don't know how to find it, but it's enough to give them hope. And so as a result, the humans that are left, huddled around this Battlestar, trying to stave off Cylon attack, are trying to find Earth where they can build a home again. Now, at the beginning, the good guys and bad guys are pretty clear-cut. The Cylons are the bad guys. The humans are the good guys. The Cylons are trying to commit genocide against the humans. The humans are just trying to survive and find a new home. But here's the thing. The farther you go into the series, the blurrier the lines actually get. You realize not very far into the series that contrary to what humans thought, and without humans knowing, there are actually Cylons that look human. Some of those Cylons know perfectly well that they're human, and they are moles and plants, and they're saboteurs. Some of the Cylons don't know that they're Cylons. They look human. They have memories of being children. They're married. They have relationships. And then all of a sudden something will happen and they'll be triggered. And then they try to assassinate one of the captains of the ships or some other crazy thing. And so very quickly what you realize is oh my goodness, it's not quite as simple. We thought that the Cylons that look like robots, we thought they were the bad guys. But now there are Cylons that look like us. And then you start learning there are some humans that are actually bad guys. They're kind of working with the Cylons. And so it's not quite as simple anymore. And over time, what you actually realize then is there are some Cylons that actually agree with the humans. They fall in love with the humans. They care for the humans. And the humans eventually even know that this person's a Cylon, but it doesn't seem to matter because at least they're trying to help you. And so eventually, by the time you get to the end of the series, the really crazy thing is that the bad guys that you started out with are no longer the bad guys. And the good guys you started out with are no longer the good guys. Rather, the issue simply seems to be who's trying to get to Earth and who's trying to stop us. As we move farther into the 21st century as local churches, I personally think the issue is very, very similar. The issues that we currently think of people as bad guys. Oh, those are those people with that agenda or that lifestyle or that thing that we don't like and that we disagree with. I'm just telling you, I think that the farther we move into the 21st century, I do think that those issues will probably evolve significantly. And the lines that we currently think that are important will continue to blur. Now, just like the Cylons and the humans, I think that those kinds of things will cease to become whether or not you're a Cylon or a human and more about the end objective. Are you trying to help us get to Earth or are you trying to prevent us from getting there? In the past, I remember when divorce was the big issue. I had friends who lost their faith, lost their relationships because their husband had an affair with their coworker and ran off. And even though they were innocent, man, the second they were divorced, it was like nobody wanted to be with them, to incorporate them. Like I remember that as a kid. But currently, the issues for many of us are actually built more around political division or issues like abortion or gay rights or positions on other things that we determine to be distasteful, sinful, or problematic. And even though we would acknowledge that divorce is not God's design, it is by no means the pariah that it would have been in the early 80s and before. And I don't know how those lines will continue to fall, friends. I will just tell you that I will bet you that things will continue to change. It wouldn't shock me if 10 to 20 years from now, we care less about whether a person is female if they want to lead, whether or not they are gay if they want to be part of a ministry, or whether they stand on a particular side of a political spectrum. The bigger issue will simply be whether or not they are trying to get to Earth or not, with Earth being the survival, health, and thriving of the gospel of Jesus and the church he came to save along the way. Now, the trick is, a lot of those issues are sin issues. I get it. A person's sexual orientation has a very specific biblical and theological question attached to it. But so does the issue of divorce and remarriage, how a person handles their family, their finances, and if they want to be really honest, how they handle food, entertainment, and every other area of their life and experience as they struggle to submit their lives to the lordship of Jesus. And I'm not saying that how we struggle through those issues will be easy or insignificant. It will be significant. It was even on the show, believe it or not. Finding out that your wife and the love of your life is actually an artificially intelligent cyborg who didn't know that she was one of those things until she tried to assassinate the captain of one of the vessels certainly created conflict and drama for all the people involved. And it didn't always go well. I'm just saying that by the time we get to the middle of the 21st century or beyond, we may all look back and be just as shocked as our television friends about who started out as our enemy and who became our friend along the way, who we thought was our friend and who has become someone who is now preventing us from getting to our new home, and how we have had to rely increasingly on God's word, his spirit, and his people to guide us through the treacherous stars, not only to stay alive, but to get where we need to be. My hope in telling this story is that we remember the need for grace, both for each other and for those of us who are seeking to be part of us. If we get too lost in the squabbles and the scratching, we may lose what's more important along the way. There are things that need to be rigidly safeguarded in the process of getting to Earth, but it is probably a smaller and more carefully guarded list of things than we currently think. I think the truth is, we all want to get to Earth together. We all want to be in that place that God has designed for the 21st century church to be, to survive, and to thrive. And just like our friends on Battlestar Galactica, I think we'll probably learn some things along the way about what values are important and how we handle conflict and discontinuity when we find it. But I think it's important along the way that we also remember that sometimes the lines that divide us aren't as important as we think, and what unites us actually is. So as we think of versions for the 21st century church and what those kinds of things could look like, I think it's a good thing for us to remember to focus on those core essential things, and then to recognize that we might need some grace in sorting out some of the things along the way. And that is the point of Battlestar Galactica.